ورمز زبان که بتونن که بسار تعقیب کرده بتونن. I think we're good to go. We can start, right? We have all the speakers and we are already 7 minutes behind our schedule.
Yes, and we have a fair good number of attendees, so we can start and other attendees can trickle in. So please start the discussion, great. And I will close my video.
Okay, great. So, Najaja.
Hello and greeting to all. I'm very pleased to be with you today in this important discussion. My name is Najla Latifi and I'm a member of Advocacy Committee of Faragi. Before anything, I would like to thank all the distinguished speakers and participants who have dedicated their valuable time to participants in today's events. Today, we will discuss the mission of United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, UNAMA, covering humanitarian assistance, political issues, and human rights. And we will take a closer look at the performance of UNAMA in the last 3 years and explore potential recommendations that could strengthen the new mandate of UNAMA. Before we move up into the main discussion, let me introduce the organization and platform that has organized this discussion to you all. Faragi, previously known as Canada's Feminist Forum for Afghanistan, CFFA, was launched in September 2023 in Canada as an advocacy platform for Afghan women leaders, women human rights defenders, and their allies. It was focused on Canada due to a large number of women leaders who resettled from Afghanistan to Canada after the 2021 fall of Kabul. CFFA has always focused on connecting with women and marginalized groups inside Afghanistan, standing in solidarity with their voices and amplifying them in decision-making spaces. CFFA quickly emerged as one of the key international platforms driving the work on women's rights and inclusion in a political pathway for Afghanistan's future. While our roots as an organization are in Canada, our vision is global. As our geographical reach and engagement with diverse stakeholders grow, the organization leadership realized a broader, more inclusive identity was needed, one which would accurately reflect this scope and our ambition for the future. As of December 2024, CFFA officially changed to Fargir. Fargir is a word in our local language which means inclusive, while women's rights, agency, and political participation will continue to be a strong focus of our work. We seek to engage and directly involve men and diverse groups as partners, allies, and stakeholders in our work. We also continue to work with youth, with Islamic scholars, and with non-Afghan allies in the region and across the globe, bringing together and mobilizing diverse stakeholders to support a future inclusive Afghanistan where justice, human rights, and equality prevail. Faragir strives to be the voice of all those who walk the path of justice, equality, and support for Afghanistan. The purpose of this webinar is to review and evaluate the mission of UNAMA in Afghanistan. In this webinar, we will discuss the performance of UNAMA in the last 3 years, the challenging context that UNAMA is working with, and the specific areas where UNAMA has performed well, and those areas where UNAMA's mandate should be strengthened. The importance of this webinar lies in the fact that you, dear participants, as activists, experts, and human rights defenders will provide valuable insights, which will inform our policy paper, which we are planning to develop and use in our advocacy for new mandate of UNAMA. We hope that by summarizing your expert opinion, we can develop practical and impactful recommendations that can help improve the situation for the people of Afghanistan and seek Afghanistan at the forefront of the global agenda. Now, I would like to invite and hand over the discussion to Ms. Nargis Nehan, who will officially begin the discussion with our knowledgeable speakers. I ask all of you to follow the discussion with patience, pay attention to issues raised and the points presented, and engage in the discussion with your questions and comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Najajan Latifi. I also would like to take this opportunity to first extend my greetings and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all our dear participants from wherever they have come online to this event. I also would like to take this opportunity to thank our great speakers and valuable participants in today's discussion. Since August 2021, when the Islamic Republic collapsed and Taliban took over Afghanistan, Afghanistan was confronted with multiple crises: the crisis of legitimacy, the crisis of humanitarian, and the crisis of human rights. And in the absence of a legitimate government and lack of presence of the international community on the ground, UNAMA has to fill a big vacuum in a highly challenging situation. Besides coordinating humanitarian assistance, upholding human rights, UNAMA also has to engage with all sides and pave the way for peace talks and formation of an inclusive government in Afghanistan. There are overall mixed impressions about UNAMA's performance in the last 3 years. While the international community is more sympathetic to UNAMA and praise UNAMA for staying inside Afghanistan and working on the ground, the Afghan civil society, women groups, and political groups are critical of UNAMA's unconditional engagement with and support to the Taliban, and lack of its engagement with Afghan civil society, women groups, and political groups, especially those that they are in exile. Our today's speakers are Mr. Nasir Ahmad Fayed, Chair of the Affairs of Afghanistan and U.S. Security Council in New York. Ms. Annie, I hope that I'm spelling your name properly, and Annie, if you can help me out, I just want to make sure that I'm pronouncing it properly. So I will say Faur Simer, and if I pronounce it incorrectly, please forgive me. A former diplomat and a senior non-resident associate of the Center for Strategic and International Studies. We also have Dr. Urzalan Nemat with us, who is a research associate at ODI Global and also a renowned women's rights advocate of Afghanistan. We also have Mr. David Leon with us, who has written a book on Afghanistan and who is an Afghanistan expert and right now a senior fellow at King's College. To start our discussion, I would like to pose the first question to Mr. Fayed. Mr. Fayed, as Afghanistan representative in UN Security Council, how do you evaluate UNAMA's performance in managing an inclusive peace talks, upholding human rights, and coordinating humanitarian assistance, and also monitoring the security situation in Afghanistan? And I would really appreciate if we have your response and overall impression in 7 minutes so that we can stay on the agenda. Thank you very much. Mr. Fayed, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Good morning to all distinguished panelists and also participants of this meeting. At the outset, I would like to thank you and thank Paragir for organizing this timely discussion. It's very important as the UNAMA mandate negotiations will start from now on, of course, beginning from the new year, and then in March, the mandate will be renewed. So this is a very important discussion, and it will help us particularly in how we should share the views of all diverse groups, experts, and academics, and all distinguished and experienced practitioners. So first of all, I would like to share that what's our view about this current mandate of UNAMA. We, of course, as representative of Afghanistan, we would like to express that we fully support the mandate of UNAMA, extension of mandate of UNAMA. UNAMA's role is very critical at this time in Afghanistan. Its presence, while all other international partners, their embassies are not present in Kabul, so UN or UNAMA is a key, has a key role to play. Particularly based on the mandate that it has. And of course, the current mandate of UNAMA is very strong, and we would be, we would like to share our thoughts and our views that it would be good if we can further strengthen it. And while it's challenging, we understand it's not easy, it would be good to reflect the past years, Taliban's last years, within 1 year, the policies that they have adopted particularly on women's, the restrictions, they should be reflected there and more with a stronger voice of condemnation, or if not condemnation, at least strong voice for reversal of these policies. But this is one of the issues we would like that the reflections should be there. And it depends, of course, upon the support of the members of the council. If we would like to strengthen the current mandate further, obviously the mandate of UNAMA is approved by the Security Council. And we really want the international community, particularly Security Council, to have a united position on the UNAMA's role, and particularly about the Taliban's policies. And I'm sure that about the UNAMA, there is a strong support by all members of the council. And because the key role that UNAMA is playing on humanitarian situation, on human rights monitoring and reporting of human rights, and also on the political aspects. About the humanitarian assistance, it's a priority. Of course, we know that UNAMA is playing a key role in facilitating and coordinating humanitarian assistance in Afghanistan among all key donors, and also ensuring that the safe and unhindered access of humanitarian to all people of Afghanistan, particularly the UN humanitarian personnel, is very important. And in terms of the economic stability and development, they are playing a key role among the key members, how they can channel these funds, and in terms of support for monitoring and human rights monitoring and reporting. That's another key important role that UNAMA is playing, and we would like that these reports should be more factual and based on the realities. The current reports are somehow either because of the challenges, access that they do not have to all parts of Afghanistan, or Taliban are not allowing because of the censorship. So this is UNAMA's reports, particularly the human rights reports, are very important. And gender equality and promotion and women empowerment is another key role that we really want that UNAMA should play its active role about that. And other areas such as, of course, rule of law and child protection, displaced people, regional cooperation, and other issues, of course, they are all included in its mandate. But the key point is about the support for governance and inclusivity. One of the key roles that we highly focus and we expect the UNAMA to become more active is about the political pillar of UNAMA's mandate. That is, of course, promoting participatory, inclusive, and responsive government at all levels, and facilitating dialogue among Afghan stakeholders, regional actors, and the international community, and as well as advocating for the meaningful participation of women, youth, and minorities in governance or in any political dialogue about Afghanistan. This is something that we, unfortunately, have seen some challenges in the past 3 years, and we want that UNAMA should become more active and more start more promotion of inclusivity and political dialogue among Afghans. And this is obviously, we know the Doha is led by United Nations, and especially UNAMA is playing a key role. But unfortunately, the Doha is somehow diverting from its original objective that was adopting a coherent and united international approach on engagement with the Taliban or about the situation of Afghanistan. So, but it's not easy. Of course, we know this depends upon key factors. As I mentioned, the support of United Nations and particularly members of the Security Council is very important. And the role of the pen holder. Of course, the next year, there will be new 5 coming members of the council, and we yet don't know who will be taking the responsibility of Afghanistan's file or pen holdership. That's very important. And the role of pen holder is important, how he or how they can manage these negotiations, how they can further strengthen. It depends upon their also their national position about human rights and women's rights and political dialogue. and also its relations with other members, how they can successfully manage to get consensus on the UNAMA's mandate if it will be renewed in a meaningful way. If not, then maybe there is another option or another likelihood that it will be just a technical rollover. But also among the unity among the P5 members is very important, other members of the Security Council, how they can really form a united position about the political inclusivity and dialogue, about the human rights, about all these key issues in the mandate of UNAMA. But another aspect that I would like to share is the implementation of the mandate. Even right now, we have a strong UNAMA mandate, we really have challenges with implementation. I know that it's not easy for UNAMA at this situation that all regional countries are bilaterally engaging with the Taliban, and other international stakeholders are also bilaterally engaging based on their priorities. But it's very challenging for the UNAMA or to form a united position. That's why in this vacuum, they are also somehow, I understand it's not easy, but at least sticking to the principles, to the values, to those to the principles and those values that are reflected in the UN Charter. And UNAMA, as a representative of UN, must play, of course, a neutral role, an impartial role. And another aspect is, of course, the role of the leadership of UNAMA. It's very important how the leadership of UNAMA can influence the dialogue or the discussions with the Taliban, how he or she can manage to really reflect these core issues that we have faced a stalemate: the women's rights, human rights, inclusivity, political dialogue, and economic development. So it's not only to just promote engagement with the Taliban or just meeting with the Taliban and showing that what they are doing is something normal or it's accepted, but even though they express that they do not recognize the Taliban. So these are the key things, but at the same time, it depends upon the Taliban as well, how much Taliban can support UNAMA's role. And obviously, Taliban are using UNAMA as a mediator among international partners, and they send their messages through UNAMA. And unfortunately, in the past 3 years, we have seen that UNAMA is asking or calling for pragmatism, for normalization, for engagement. But from the Taliban side, we do not see any good faith to show a good faith for flexibility, for confidence building. And these are the challenges, unfortunately. And at the same time, the implementation of the mandate also depends how much other member states and regional countries support UNAMA's mandate. And on that, unfortunately, there is no united position among international partners. Unfortunately, this is the biggest challenge. And that's why the Doha process was established, the UN-led Doha process, based on the recommendations of the Secretary General's assessment. And unfortunately, on that also, we see there is a stalemate because the Taliban have declined political dialogue. They decline and refuse appointment of a special envoy. And this is another challenge, unfortunately. But the role of civil society organizations, role of all UN, women representative, Afghan diverse groups, advocates, how they can engage with different international stakeholders and pressure to emphasize on the effective implementation of UNAMA's mandate. Because if we have a strong mandate on the paper, but we cannot implement it, and we cannot make a progress, then it's a big challenge. So I think this is somehow I will, because my time will be running out, so I will stop here. And I will be happy to share further information or answer any questions. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mr. Fayek. We do have a question and answer session for our participants that they can directly pose their questions to our speakers. Now I would like to turn to Ms. Annie. Ms. Annie, as Mr. Faik mentioned, there are stalemates in Afghanistan in some important areas, including the human rights, women's rights, peace talks, and formation of an inclusive government. Um, Although we have seen that UNAMA has tried to make some progress in these areas, but somehow there are not any, besides like not any progress, we see that the situation is deteriorating. So while UNAMA's main task before 2021 and even after that is to ensure political stability in Afghanistan by engaging with all partners. Was there any way that UNAMA could prevent the collapse? And as a former diplomat, how do you evaluate performance of UNAMA, especially in the last 3 years, and in managing the Doha process, which all of us was hoping that it will be a mechanism and a pathway for an inclusive peace talks for Afghanistan?
Thank you so much, and thank you for for including me in this important discussion. I want to look backwards as you asked me to talk about UNAMA before 2021, and their mandate was very wide. It was far more than a security mandate. They had 8 tasks. A couple of them had security dimensions. They were supposed to help if they were asked with an Afghan-led peace process. They were supposed to cooperate with, the NATO forces, and they were supposed to promote, development and governance priorities, but there was a very big economic angle to UNAMA's responsibilities before 2021. Another element of their responsibilities was to support the 2019 presidential elections. And of course, my own service in Afghanistan was during other elections. These were quite difficult, as you know, for logistical reasons and security reasons, and also for obviously political reasons, to continue to serve the international community's wider goals while a political campaign was underway. UNAMA always had a human rights mandate, and of course a special focus on women's rights. This is all before 2021, and all of it was designed to be working through and with the government of the country. It was not UNAMA all by itself. There was a really important element of what UNAMA was supposed to do, which is they were supposed to work on dispute resolution and conflict prevention, and indeed, as you say, political stability. And they were supposed to work at international, as in mainly regional, national, and sub-national levels. The sub-national levels were supported by regional offices. They had over 10 offices outside of Kabul. And the people who worked in those offices got to know these individual regions very well. They understood the conflict drivers, and they actually had a huge potential in helping to bring about peaceful resolution of conflicts that were, somehow everything that was wrong was labeled as, between, let's say, the government forces or international forces and the Taliban. But there was a lot of conflict that had very local drivers. And so UNAMA was in a good position where they could have been helpful, and they were helpful, working on those drivers of conflict as well. But the question was, was there any way that UNAMA could prevent the collapse? Well, unfortunately, the UN and the international community's role was very circumscribed by basically the United States and the military role of the time. Whatever it was that the UN was trying to achieve was taking a backseat to the side negotiations that were occurring in 2019 and 2020 between the US and the Taliban, with the Doha Agreement in February 2020 foremost among those outcomes. And so I don't really necessarily think that UNAMA could have prevented the collapse, because the outside influence of the US withdrawing its support essentially for the government was really the most decisive factor of the 2021 collapse of the government. So as a former diplomat, I would say that I agree completely with Chargé Faik's assessment that UNAMA has not used its mandate in a forceful way, in ways that it could, to support human rights, women, any kind of internal Afghan opposition and discussion about how to push back on the terrible human rights abuses and repression being practiced right now by the Taliban. You know, the UN has its words on a page, its mandate, but there's more to it. There's the politics of the moment, which I just mentioned. The US was unfortunately a very negative role in the politics. But UN missions can rise above the politics by really calling on all the resources of the international community. All the members of the Security Council have continued to support the mandate, which means that the Secretary General's representative could be doing a lot more than she is doing now to push for the real forceful nature of that mandate. And so I would think that the Doha process has been a particular disappointment, because it should be the strongest manifestation of the international community's interest in universal values, not the weakest. And I hope that there are ways that we can strengthen both the mandate, the words on a page, and the implementation of the mandate going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annie, and for the very powerful point, especially with regard to mandate of UNAMA and its performance. Now I come to Dr. Ursula Nemad. Dr. Nemad, do you really think UNAMA has any mechanism to ensure engaging with all Afghan stakeholders, including the political and as well as the civil society? And specifically, is UNAMA engaging with women's group, civil society, and political groups in exile? Because we all know very well that all the groups and individuals that they were playing a very important role in Afghanistan, all of them are now living in exile. And you have a big vacuum when it comes to engagement with these different sides inside Afghanistan.
Thank you very much, Nargis John. Good morning, good afternoon, good day, and good evening to all participants. It's a great pleasure and honor to join this panel with distinguished panelists and guests. With regard to your question, I will just come back to it, but generally sharing my overall perspective about UNAMA and the assessment of UNAMA, I think this initiative is very crucial. And it is crucial mainly for the reason that the gap that you just mentioned in terms of the mechanism is still there, existent, and not really systematically addressed. The gap where Afghans who have been forced to leave or now are in exile and who are like part of the vibrant Afghan civil society, they are generally neglected from the political discussions, from the development and even humanitarian related discussions in general. I often find myself as an academic, as a researcher, I find myself in absolute minority, and sometimes even I am not invited to discussions that are about Afghans and Afghanistan. So that systematic neglection in exemption of Afghan experts, practitioners, academia, researchers from the key discussions about Afghanistan is something that goes beyond the UNAMA mandate. But I would say that listening to the distinguished guests earlier, it also is part of the UNAMA mandate. So, and we haven't seen that happening. So yes, maybe on an ad hoc base, we see that civil society is being consulted, then a smaller number, probably in Kabul mainly, of Afghan civil society or NGOs that are still active in Afghanistan are being consulted, are being invited over, and discussions happen with them. But we have not seen a very systematic way of consultation with the Afghan local civil society, with the ordinary Afghans who live across the country and who also have a voice to, and their voice matters as much as the voice of everyone else. And particularly as much as the voice of the de facto authorities. Okay, de facto authorities are de facto authorities. They have to be consulted or at least talked to. But what about, the general people who are affected and whose life is directly affected by the current situation? So in a nutshell, I can say that we have not seen a more systematic way of civil society engagement. The reports that UNAMA used to do in the pre-2001 context, we saw that the last report on protection of civilian in the armed conflict was July 21. That reporting did not continue, but UNAMA actually published one report in, I think, a year after the changes in Afghanistan in sometime around July 22, which was directly challenged by Taliban, which was kind of expected. So the only significant contribution, I would say, is this human rights report that at least is published and is documented by some aspects of the systematic violations of human rights that is happening in the country. So what is not seen in overall in this process is non-existent of this mechanism, not only with the civil society inside Afghanistan, but also in exile. We haven't seen, and especially the one experience that we all witnessed that is the Doha discussions and dialogues, and particularly the dialogues, the Doha 3 dialogues. We've seen the continuation of the exclusion of the Afghan civil society from the Doha discussions on the order or on the request of Taliban. We understand why Taliban don't want independent experts there or civil society members. They are an authoritarian regime, and this is normally expected from an authoritarian regime. But what we cannot accept and we cannot see any justification for is the role or the space or the leverage that UNAMA has, not as a one state, but as the representative or as the entity mandated by the Security Council, which includes all kinds of conflicting parties over Afghanistan. So they have that leverage to ensure that at least professional, technical, and non-partisan type of actors from Afghanistan or beyond Afghanistan about and related to Afghanistan are invited over, and these kind of very technical discussions, such as counter narcotics, such as private sector development in other issues, are spoken not in a sloganistic, political way, but more deeply and in-depth way. Another point I would make, and then probably I will leave the rest of the discussions on question and answer part, is the role of UNAMA in terms of their engagement with the authorities. So if we look at the last 2 years, 3 years, and how the political engagement benefited the international community and the demands that the international community has from the de facto authorities, and how de facto authorities used engagement with UNAMA, particularly as the representative of the international community in country, I think the Taliban have gained much more attention, much more credibility, from these kind of engagement, and particularly from the photo shooting activities, I would call it, very frankly, than the international community gaining that. And we always, when we as Afghans, as civil society activists, when we raise this with our international friends and supporters or colleagues, they say, well, we don't have any leverage. And I'm like, really? Are you sure we don't have any leverage? Because, I mean, if you have a presence in the entire aid and assistance arriving in Afghanistan, I'm not saying, by the way, to conditionalize the humanitarian aid. Of course, that is a completely separate discussion. But the leverage is to allow them to use these photo shooting opportunities to show that, look, we are on the road towards legitimization, toward recognition and all that. So one has to be careful. Any single sign, whether through social media or public, anything on the public domain, can easily be used by authoritative regimes such as the Taliban in their own benefits. I think that has to be part of the future mandates to ensure that there is a clear guideline on how to define the engagement and how to sort of like measure progress or regress in these cases from these sort of like activities. And these are not about every time I notice, critiques or criticizes about this, everyone took it personal. It's nothing personal. The UNAMA is an expression of the international community in country, trying to become the voice of concerns of the world about Afghanistan and of the people of Afghanistan about the country. And it's not nobody's private seat or private position to say, oh, I'm a contractor, I'm just doing myself. No, actually, whatever you do and you say, it will change people's life in one direction or another. So I think there is a huge responsibility to individuals working for these large institutions as humans and as principled humans, I would say. And also, institutionally speaking, I think there is a huge responsibility, and we hope to see more professional and less political. I know UNAMA is political anyway, but less partisan-wise political figures and actors in these positions so that they can maintain the balance that is required from the United Nations as an institution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Naimat, for the very valuable points that you mentioned, especially about unconditional engagement of UNAMA with the Taliban as a de facto authority, that actually, beside not being able to make them to reverse any of the policy that they have adopted, but also strengthening them, emboldening them, and using these engagements as a tool to also demonstrate not to international community, but mostly to the people of Afghanistan, that they are on the path towards normalization. And we have witnessed many of the interviews that their leadership from different sectors are coming and saying that we had a meeting with this individual, we had a meeting with the representative of this institution and that country, and they have promised us that they're helping us with the normalization. And so I'm coming to David with my last question. David, as you heard from colleagues, there are critiques about UNAMA's unprincipled engagement with the Taliban, that besides not benefiting the people of Afghanistan, it has also emboldened Taliban. There are also critiques about not engaging with the civil society inside Afghanistan, as well as with the civil society and political community who are living in exile. And somehow the kind of engagement and approach that UNAMA has adopted, many Afghans believe that it has emboldened Taliban, besides not putting any pressure on them for any kind of changes. So as someone that Afghanistan, the international community, beside adding up your own perspective about what our speakers mentioned, I would be very interested for our speakers to also hear from you that what UNAMA could have done differently in the last 3 years that could have benefited, their engagement could have benefited the people of Afghanistan, and it could have benefited the international community, and it could have helped us in moving forward towards a more inclusive political path and peace talks in Afghanistan. David, over to you.
Well, thank you, Nargis John, for this opportunity to address a very important meeting at an important time, and I really appreciate it. I mean, the first thing to say is that any engagement with the Taliban Taliban has failed. What the UN has been doing, and what Western donor countries have been doing in particular, has not worked. I mean, the Western donor countries have led the Doha meetings, and we saw, I mean, Doha 3, we saw the contempt that the Taliban showed the international community at that event by sending only their spokesman rather than any kind of minister of any senior level, even after the international community had agreed to all of their conditions. So the agenda was the Taliban's. It was just about the economy and counter-narcotics. Human rights was off the agenda. There was no discussion with other civil society actors or any attempt to have an inclusive talks. And even then, the Taliban still treated it with contempt. So I think the international community, the UN Security Council, need to recognize that what has been happening so far has failed, and they need to find a new path. All of the time, the desire has been to engage with the Taliban, not with former Republic actors such as distinguished representatives like Ambassador Fake, who fights the good fight, bravely keeping the flag flying. But it's a very, very difficult. I know that embassies have been closed one by one. The British government recently forced the Afghan embassy in London to close, and again, with no nothing in return from the Taliban for that unilateral gesture. So, I completely agree with Dr. Nemat that this sort of unconditional photo shooting, as she calls it, is all one way, and simply engaging with them has given them diplomatic legitimacy without at any point holding them to account. And I think there is a lack of leverage. There's not very much that we can hold over their heads unless you're going to put aid onto the table. And at some point, I think the UN has to begin to question its role in the country, continuing to roll on the mandate year after year, with all of the fine language about inclusive government and recognition of women's rights, etc. When things are going backwards, is not working, hasn't worked, and at some point you have to begin to forge a new path. And I mean we saw the United States in the last 20 years after 9/11 doing the same thing year after year and never sort of stopping to think. And I think potentially the international community is making the same mistakes during this time with the Taliban. Aid organizations need to question their strategic value beyond humanitarian aid, and the aid is distorting the economy. Annie mentions, the economic impact that the UN has before, but if you put in, I think it's $80 million a week now into the Afghan economy, coming only at times when the aid community needs it, or when donor appetite is sufficient to fuel that pipeline, not coming at a time when it can keep the currency strong, or as Bill Bird has argued recently at USIP, that perhaps there should be a steady depreciation of the Afghan currency, but it's very hard to do that because you don't have any control over the money supply that's coming in. So aid is distorting, not bringing the political effect that it might bring. And it seems to me that the UN are currently out of ideas. The 2023 Sinirologlu plan, it's now a year old. It's completely in the sand. It was signed up to, and you'll remember, with this 2-track idea that there should be more constructive engagement by countries that were interested in Afghanistan, with a path towards full recognition if the Taliban responded to overtures over inclusive government and women's rights, etc. And the Taliban's response has been to not allow the appointment of an envoy and to ban the human rights envoy because he spoke up about gender apartheid. So they're cutting themselves off from the world, or from the world that wants to do something more constructive about women's rights, at the same time as China and Russia and some other countries have de facto recognition of what look like embassies and all but names in their countries. So if countries are unwilling to put aid on the table as a lever, and close half of the UN missions because they're not delivering much, frankly, and they're actually acting beyond legality because they're not able to operate properly with equality of employment for women, then they need to put a clear timetable on the line for clear modalities towards the fine language of the mandate that gets rolled on year after year for an inclusive and representative government with the full and meaningful participation of women. If there were in the next mandate a clear timeline for that and clear modalities towards it, then you might begin to change things. And I'd just like to make a final point, which is the international community's obsession has been with engaging the Taliban, how to talk to the de facto administration, and wanting some kind of a negotiated settlement. But there's been no attempt at any time to shape the other side of the table. And we know that some of the former militia leaders and other political actors who have got money have successfully met, and they met again in Ankara recently. And that group of Afghan opposition leaders have been quite effective. But in getting together more civil society groups or an effective political opposition of technocrats, of individuals from the former administration, the emerging generation of leaders, it's been very hard to get international attention. The UK government has not put much effort into this. Other big donors, the US has been completely supine in the Biden administration because they want to close down any mention of the word Afghanistan at any point. So there is, this is the one bright spark on the horizon of a Trump presidency, that perhaps there will be a new policy on Afghanistan, whatever it is. So I think there's been a lack of willingness on the part of the international community to really put money and time into forming an Afghan opposition. Just think how different it would be if there were a political office for the Afghan opposition. And it'll be hard to get to that, but without significant international support. And I've been involved in the Vienna process to try to build a democratic Afghanistan. Annie has come and spoken at one of our events, and that process has been quite effective as far as it goes, but it's funded by a very generous but very small Austrian private foundation. It doesn't have any sort of international ownership or international sponsorship or international support. And I think there's a real challenge in international thinking in terms of the lack of willingness to build effective opposition to the Taliban or civil society opposition. And look, this is not really easy. Attempting to engage the Taliban in any kind of talks process really ignores the nature of their divinely inspired government. They don't have the concept of being able to compromise with any other authority in the same physical space. So I think when it does come, as it has to at some point, to some kind of discussion with some entities within the Taliban organization, it's going to be very, very hard to do. But we're not even beginning to do it.
Thank you very much, David. And thank you all speakers. Now we are going to have two interventions from one organization that's working inside Afghanistan, and as well as one individual who's actually living inside Afghanistan. I would like to first pose to Wajma Farooq, who's leading Women, Peace and Security Organization that's working inside Afghanistan. And this organization has also started consultation in different provinces of Afghanistan about the role mandate of UNAMA. But Wajma herself is also very much a renowned women's rights advocate, all the time working at the policy level. So besides telling us about the consultation, Ms. Farooq, I would also be interested for you to share your perspective about, with our participants, about different points that the speakers discussed, and especially when it comes to role of the civil society and women group, and the space that we need for ourselves, especially that there is no space for women to do anything inside Afghanistan. So Ms. Farooq, we're having 5 minutes, and I really hope that you stick to that timeline so that we can follow this.
Thank you. Thank you, Nargis John, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to my colleagues and friends in Afghanistan. I just finished, like a whole week of specific consultations with a number of women inside Afghanistan, the one that we work with, which the number actually goes to 1,000, but specifically we have been talking about UNAMA, and then it's interesting to hear from what goes on in each province and how different reactions and people's perceptions are. The first thing I want to say that, working inside Afghanistan and talking to, different provinces and talking to people beyond Kabul, UNAMA has a very little leverage on the de facto authorities, very much nationally, and that can be actually seen, in their behavior, but at the same time, the way they actually kind of, carry themselves. But at the same time, there are different, how could I say, interactions that take place. For example, in I've been
Can you all listen to Ms. Farouk, or the voice is getting?
No, her voice is cutting.
Yeah, your voice is getting cut, so we could not follow the discussion. Maybe if you can turn off your camera, that might help.
Yeah. Is it okay? So what I was saying is that in different provinces, for example, in Bamiyan, the work permit issue, UNAMA engaged with the local department of, NGOs, and things could resolve. So, and similarly, for example, in Farah and Herat, there has been a number of issues, particularly about a couple of female prisoners who had been going through a very hard situation, and UNAMA engaged, and a number of women legal defense lawyers, and they actually helped out of the prison. So what I want to say is that there are different small examples. I believe in pragmatism. Please forgive me. I know that the idealism that we have, particularly in how much we want things to change, but looking at the situation on the ground, we have actually gone basic. So when you talk to any, Afghan on the ground, the first question is about the livelihood. The first, worry is that they don't have the food to feed their little kids. They are struggling to find heating for the winter. So what the Taliban have done, actually, limiting people's livelihood options, they have taken away their agency in a way that, like, people have literally forgotten about their rights issues, and they are just struggling with, feeding themselves and feeding their children and kind of heating up the roof on their head. So when we talk about, the issues of in crisis, that is actually very big what we think and what we have seen, because the economy on the ground and how the spaces have shrunk for people, the aid becomes the only option, the only kind of, savior for so many people, as much as we hate to say that. The role of UNAMA's monitoring in the aid, and then how much UN agencies, for example, are relying on local departments, on local governments, which are the de facto authorities, on the aid distribution, or, for example, even doing projects. So very problematic, because they do with local partners, actually, agencies, including UNDP, WFP, WHO, UNICEF, for example. They very much have to actually work with local departments of the de facto authorities, and that's where they actually, kind of distort the whole situation. Like, the women are telling us that UNAMA is not even talking to us, from different provinces. They are saying that, a woman was telling me that was regional, head from Bamiyan to Daikundi, and she only said hi to, like, they invited.
Wajmajan, we totally lost you, so I don't know whether it's the connection or anything. Let's just wait for a few seconds for Ms. Farouk. Oh, she got totally offline. Oh, she's back here. And if she's not, then we can go to Sana from Afghanistan. I hope we have better connection from inside Afghanistan to hear from Sana until Ms. Farooq fix her internet. Ms. Sana, you are also working inside Afghanistan, and you are the one who is representing the voice of the youth as well. And you are working very actively with women from across Afghanistan on different activities, including the consultation that right now we are coordinating with 200 women inside Afghanistan about mandate of UNAMA. Can you quickly, in 5 minutes, summarize to us that so far, the consultation that you have with women, what are their impression about UNAMA? Are they engaged? They are not engaged? What they think? If you just give us a snapshot and of your engagement in 5 minutes.
Salam everyone. Hope you're doing all fine and well. So I want to share some insight from the work we've been doing to understand the current situation in Afghanistan, especially the challenges faced by women. So as you know, that UNAMA's mandate, it focuses on supporting peace, protecting human rights, and ensuring that the voices of Afghan people are heard during these difficult times. So recently, we've conducted 20 discussions in 20 provinces of Afghanistan. We met with the 10 women from each of these provinces. We listened to their stories, their struggles, and their hopes for the future. So these conversations gathered from the diverse experiences of Afghan women, it also provides us a glimpse into the reality on the ground. So one of the biggest concerns across all of the provinces is the ban on girls' education. So this came up from everywhere, from Bamyan to Herat, and women are deeply hurt by this restriction. A mother from Kunduz province, she told us that my daughter asks me every day why she cannot go to school, and she doesn't have the answer for this, and it breaks her heart. So similar feelings have been shared in Bamyan, where women said that their daughters are being robbed from their future. So the FGDs, they also shed a light upon the stories that those who sought refuge abroad. So driven by desires for safety, for education, and opportunities, those who left the country were hoping for safety and better opportunities. So some went to Iran, some went to Turkey or Pakistan. They faced even more challenges. A woman from Herat shared that I left for Iran thinking that it would be better for me, my kids, my family. But without a proper visa, she couldn't stay, and she had no choice but to come back to Afghanistan. So these stories show us how limited their options are. We've also heard about the heavy toll on their mental health. A woman from Paktia province said that I live in constant fear because whenever I have to go outside, I cannot go without a male guardian, and it's suffocating me. So the pressure and fear that's affecting everyone, especially women and girls. These women we spoke to are not asking for aid. They're asking for advocacy, for protection for their rights, and for practical measures that allow them to rebuild their lives. They want the international communities, especially UNAMA, particularly in relation to women's education, employment, human rights, and they want it not just to provide them humanitarian aid, but actively advocate in the resolution and in the restoration of Afghan women's rights and their active participation in the society. Now, despite everything, these women are not giving up. They are not asking for just handouts. They're asking for their rights. They just want to work. They just want to study, and they just want to contribute to the society. A woman from Laghman province, she put it simply in few words. She said that we need help. We don't need food. We don't need medicine. But we need our right to education, to work, and to live freely. So these women, they want the world, especially UNAMA, to stand up for them and push for the real change. The woman we spoke to, they also wanted UNAMA that there needs to be more done to advocate for their rights and put pressure on the current regime to lift restrictions, especially on education and work. And in closing these discussions, one thing was made clear, that Afghan women are resilient, but they need proper support, a support to reclaim their rights, to access education, and for a better future, because without the support, without UNAMA's critical role in amplifying their voices, they cannot do anything. So they want UNAMA to ensure that their rights are protected and amplified as well. I just want to say that let's work together to ensure that Afghan women and girls, they have the opportunities they deserve. So they can build a brighter future where they can study, where they can work and live a happy life together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Afghan, for your intervention. We are having 10 minutes for taking the questions of the audience. Some of them have written it, but we can also get around 3 questions from those that they have not written, they have not shared it. Ananya, can you please first read those questions that the participants have written, and then also we can ask anybody that, like, if they want to ask any question, they can raise their hand so that you can give them the mic. But before you start, let me translate that so that those that they read it, they can raise their hand. دوستای عزیز، قسمت که به انگلیسی بر همه گفتم. بازم تشکری میکنیم از اشتراک همگی شما در برنامه امروز. کسایی که سوالای خود نوشته کردن خیلی خوب، به طور خلاصه هم کار ما ترجمه میکنه، امروز سخنران شریک میکنه. کسای دیگه که هم میخواین که سوال داشته باشن میتونن که دست خود بلند بکنن. ما به خاطر از اینکه وقت کم است در حدود 3 سوال میخوایم که بگیریم تا دوستا سخنرانا برشان راضی شوه و اونا نظریات خود در مورد سوالات و تفسیرهای شما بدن. و ما خواهش میکنیم کسایی که سوال میکنه یا تفسیر میکنه اگر 1 دقیقه گپ بزنه تا بتونیم که وقت سوال زیادتر بگیریم و وقت بر سخنرانا هم داشته باشیم. Ananya, over to you for mentioning the question that you got online.
Yes, thank you so much. Just want to acknowledge that there has been a lot of not just simply questions, but a lot of comments on the situation of women's rights in Afghanistan, its relation with UNAMA, and if UNAMA is willing to strike a political deal and kind of condone this situation of violation of women's rights at that political expense. There have been a lot of comments regarding that in the chat. I will be reading out the main question that came in the chat earliest. Should we go, Nargisjan, should we go question by question, or should I share we should go question by question.
How many questions do we have? If they are manageable, just go quickly.
Okay, we have many and more are coming in, but the first question which was raised was, in March 2022, Resolution 2626 outlined 4 main activities. The UN Security Council tasked the SRSG to facilitate dialogue among all stakeholders to ensure the establishment of an inclusive and representative government. What has the SRSG done in this regard so far? Does it not imply that UNAMA has failed to uphold the resolution?
You can continue sharing quickly all the questions.
All the questions.
So that then we can,
Okay, I think there are many. Let's just share 3 for now. The second question was, why has UNAMA failed to effect meaningful changes in the Taliban's policies towards women and minorities? Is this due to ineffective strategies, structural limitations in its mandate, or insufficient coordination and international pressure mechanisms? And the third one was, how has UNAMA ensured that Afghan women's voices are heard in monitoring and reporting on human rights violations?
Thank you, Ananya. We also have one of the participants online, Muhammad Salim Argandiwal, who has raised his hand. Can you give him the mic so that he can talk?
Yes, Mr. Salim, please ask your question. I have unmuted you. You can unmute yourself. I've given speaking access.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate this session. This is very useful. And I really want the upcoming mandate of UNAMA to focus on education and the rights of the girls and women in Afghanistan. This is very crucial for all the fathers. I had a trip actually in 2023 in Afghanistan. So every parent that I was seeing, so they were deeply concerned for their parents. So I traveled to 3-4 provinces, and this was a concern that is I cannot even explain how concerned they were. So I really appreciate if you could do that. While, however, the peace is also a very crucial topic of the day, and every Afghan wants the end of the conflict for this half century. So for my question from both Afghans in leadership, mostly in this session, like Mr. Fayed and Ms. Nergis, and also like our experts like Ms. Ursulan, is that what is our role to unify the politicians and civil society outside Afghanistan? So until the politicians and civil society outside Afghanistan do not unify, I see it very difficult for Taliban to accept any deal. So just my question was that. Thank you very much.
You're on mute, Nargis Jan.
تشکر بسیار در غندیوال صاحب. دوستای دیگه که آنلاین هستن، شنوندگان محترم، کس سوال خود همگی نوشته کردن. اگر سوال خود نوشته نکردن میتونن دست خود بلند بکنن. ما یک یا نهایت دو سوالگان گرفته میتونیم باز بروز به طرف سخنرانا پس بینیم که سوالا را جواب بدن. Ananya, I think since everybody has written their questions, they are not raising hands. So perhaps what I suggest that we also quickly go through the rest of the questions so that then we can get to speakers, because we have just around 15 minutes left, and then we can also wrap up the discussion.
Yes, let me take one question from the question answer bar over here. Farhad Yusufzada has asked, why has UNAMA failed to effect meaningful changes in the Taliban's policies towards women and minorities? Is this due to ineffective, I think this was read out, structural limitations in its mandate or insufficient coordination and international mechanisms? There's a long question regarding women's protection. Okay, there is another question. What initiatives or strategies can be implemented to support and empower Afghan youth, particularly girls, in accessing quality education and reaching their full potential? There are many questions which are coming in. One of the important ones is, what accountability measures are in place to ensure that women-led organizations are consulted in the humanitarian issue? And how has UNAMA ensured that humanitarian aid reaches Afghan women, especially those in remote areas, given the restrictions imposed on their movement and access to services?
Thank you very much, Ananya, for raising all these questions. We have one question, hand raised from the participants. We take that, and then we are moving towards the speakers. Please give the mic to Samiullah Fateh.
Mr. Fatih, Samiullah Fatih, you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Yes, thank you. Absolutely. Hello, everybody. I hope everybody is doing well. Thanks for the opportunity for giving me to ask and share my comment. My name is Samiullah Fateh, and I am a human rights advocate at the United Nations. So it's basically like a question and a comment, which contains on how we can promote the opportunity for Afghan youth that they're in the United States, on getting them involved in diplomacy, getting them involved in advocacy. As you guys mentioned, we need Afghan youth. We need their help. We need their advocacy. So basically my question is, and it's a comment basically, not a question. We need an easier way for Afghan youth, Afghan boys and girls, to getting them into advocacy and to promote them into share Afghan women and girls' innocent voices. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are a few questions that are raised by one of the participants, and she sent me requesting that I should raise it. So she's asking that how has UNAMA ensured that Afghan women's voices are heard in monitoring and reporting of the human rights violations inside Afghanistan? What steps UNAMA has taken to document and address the specific violation of women's rights under the current regime? Has UNAMA developed mechanisms to engage Afghan women directly in shaping its human rights agenda? How has UNAMA ensured that humanitarian aid reaches Afghan women, especially those in remote areas? I think this was mentioned by Anania. And what accountability measures are in place to ensure that women-led organizations are consulted and included in the coordination of humanitarian assistance? With regard to peace talks, in what ways has UNAMA advocated for the inclusion of Afghan women in peace talks and decision-making processes? How is UNAMA addressing the exclusion of women from political and public life under the current de facto regime? And the last one is also about the one question there is about the Doha process, that if there is, what will happen to Doha process? Is there going to be according, what is your impression? Is there going to be continuation of Doha process? And will that, is there any hope for that to become inclusive, or it will keep on excluding all other sides and just focusing on the Taliban? Oh, there are a lot of questions and we are left with quite limited time. So I'm actually getting back to each of the speakers, and this time I'll just go the other way around. So I'm going to start from David, and I ask each of our respected and distinguished speakers to speak for 3 minutes so that we can give equal time to all of you before wrapping up the discussion. And please respond to all these questions that we have in this discussion. Thank you.
Difficult to respond to all of them, but I mean, if I could sort of summarize some thoughts based on those, very interesting contributions. I would say that the UN is only the sum of its parts. It is only the UN that we've got. I mean, this is not. There's been a lot of the questions of saying the UN SRG has failed. These kinds of questions. I mean, I don't think this is personal on the part of the UN SRG. I think the system worked against it, and I think it is going to be very difficult to get the UN to a much more engaged, and proactive sense that actually, they could take a more stronger line on just what they're actually doing in Afghanistan. And I'm struck by a number of the contributions from Afghanistan, and particularly the very strong and very moving comments from Ms. Sana Afghan, and thank you very much for sharing that. That women in Afghanistan are not asking for aid; they're asking for advocacy. The political side of this is much more important, frankly, than the aid and development stuff, in my view. And I think it should be taking center stage. And all of these questions can be, picked up from that. And we heard Wajma Frog before she was cut off by the internet. So UNAMA has not reached out to women. I mean, I think they have collected some information, but civil society groups have done much better than UNAMA in collecting the sense of what's going on. So I think we are seeing a situation that is failing the people of Afghanistan, and really needs to be sort of grabbed by the neck, but it's going to be very, very difficult to do because of the way that the UN is run. Just finally, this question about mobilizing Afghan youth in the diaspora, I think you can really only do that if you've got something to mobilize towards. And until we have an effective, political voice of the Afghan opposition, government in exile, whatever you want to call it, transitional, Afghan political process, then it's difficult for people to mobilize around it and to have a dream. And I mean, there are attempts being made at the moment, which I know, between different leaders to say, look, we need a united voice. And perhaps if that comes, then mobilizing Afghan youth will be easier. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David, for your responses. I now come to Ms. Annie, because I believe she has to leave soon for another engagement. So Ms. Annie, over to you with 3 minutes.
Thank you.
Reminder.
Thank you so much. I want to say 3 things in response to all of these important questions, the important interventions, and I echo David in my appreciation for Sana and Wasma's statements. There should be, by the international community and UNAMA, a profound reorientation towards engagement with non-Taliban Afghans, rather than this idea that engagement with the Taliban is truly the goal. There has to be a very profound change of heart. And I think that the special assessment report, although in its entirety hasn't been adopted, contains elements that could be, which would support a sort of international support to consultations among Afghans so that they form a solid group that can then engage themselves with the Taliban, not the international community with the Taliban, but Afghans with the Taliban eventually. Secondly, is to bear in mind the politics of the Security Council. Sometimes there's a view that maybe people can come and advocate with the US and EU and et cetera, and then we could go to the UN and ask for something. Sometimes, in fact, the idea that the US is in favor of something puts China and Russia on the other side of it. And so, reminder to all of the people involved in this, Pakistan is now on the Security Council. China and Russia have their views. Better or worse, the best ideas are going to come through them, right? If Russia, China, Pakistan want something to happen, it's going to happen. And so I don't know that their ideas will be good, but they need to be influenced. And it will not work to just come to the US and ask for something to happen. And the last thing is unity among Afghans. It doesn't have to be sort of unity under a single leader. It should be unity of purpose and unity of advocacy, right? On a case-by-case, issue-by-issue basis, there should be unity of what people want and the priority that they're setting. It does not mean that everyone has signed up, right, to join each other in a single political project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ani. Now I'd like to come to Dr. Nemat. Dr. Nemat, over to you for responding to some of the questions in 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well? I'm on headphones. I hope you can get. So very briefly, I think I fully support most of the statements made by other co-panelists and also commentators, Wajmajan and Sanajan. So one thing that I would like to share with regards to the Taliban's position, the Taliban's regime in the last 3 years, they showed very clearly that they are very exclusive. And exclusive means you are either a Taliban, then you have to prove it that you are a Taliban from a very local level of local institutions, local governance, and even village representation, the way that they have sort of like managed it. They have control over it. Up to the very senior positions. So your loyalty to the Taliban must be approved by someone who has been on a senior position, who can say that you have either served in one of their fronts or physically supported their missions. Other than that, no one has really place in current governance system and decision-making systems. So it's very sort of like different form of governance and different form of leadership. So one thing that is clear is that the Taliban cannot continue rule Afghanistan in this setting. They know it. That's why they're 3 years on, they are still on a caretaker, hukumat sarparast, like they are not like a fully fledged government. So that is like one thing. On the unity side, I would like to share very quickly, like allowing my limited timing. The unity is not a realistic in the way that we sort of like imagine. On this point specifically, I agree with Wajmajan that we have to be pragmatic in saying that with regards to the unity of Afghan politicians, women's movement and civil society, I would like to say that when civil society is broad, so unity of civil society on purpose, yes, possible, or like coming everyone under single leadership, it will not be a civil society. It will be a very like what we say like farmoishi, like it will be very like order based and kind of like a mechanical civil society, which we don't like that. We need civil society to be diverse, challenging, and challenge everyone, challenge us, challenge Taliban, challenge anti-Taliban. Our politicians, unfortunately, the way that they have been brought up over the last years, over the years of conflict, is always about external dependency. So now we've seen that because of that kind of bringing up of the politicians, they are lost and they don't know what to do. And there's no appetite to support them in the way. that they were supported by their masters as before. And now that we see that certain countries like Turkey, like Pakistan are like consider, okay, just in case we are fed up with one group, let's just pick up another group. There are some elements of movement among the former politicians, like some of this. I think there is a huge opportunity for the younger generation of politicians, of those who are inside Afghanistan particularly, to form their own purpose-based fronts and raise their voices. I think that will be very powerful, and that will be something that will sort of like lead the entire Afghans everywhere behind them. But if Taliban are genuine about inclusivity, they have to allow such platforms to emerge, because they usually history shows that anyone raised their voice without the wishes of the intervening forces or ruling forces, they were all smashed out. So they have to be allowed, and also people inside Afghanistan should sort of like think about it and take to that stage. I think that will be the way forward. And women's movement is a separate discussion. I know now time is up, but I mean, within all the politicians, civil society, broader civil society and women, I think the most sort of like khudjouj, or the most sort of self-brought movement that maintains some level of advocacy and work is women groups and organizations, diverse as they are. I think they have unity of purpose, and we've seen that in Albania. We've seen that in several other settings and platforms where women of different views and opinions came together and continue to come together on this question. And I hope that they get the support that is deserved by them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Fayek, I intentionally brought you at the last because I wanted to hear the response of all the other speakers. And then in light of that, besides responding, we will also be very much interested to hear from you that what we can do from now till March to be able to influence and do advocacy for strengthening mandate of UNAMA and strengthening the accountability part of it, and also the Afghan engagement part of it, other than the Taliban. Over to you. What 4 minutes? Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank all distinguished and respectable panelists for their very insightful and very wonderful points and remarks that they made. I totally support and endorse most of them. But coming to the questions, I agree with most of the points that unfortunately, with a divided Security Council because of the global issues and global crisis, it's not about Afghanistan. Since August 2021, Afghanistan somehow was abandoned, and now we are being somehow forgotten. So what we are fighting is to bring back Afghanistan at the center of attention. For this, we are grateful to the very vocal voices of women and civil society representatives for fighting, for keeping their voice raised against the Taliban. And they are the ones who are really every day trying to oppose the normalization, the current situation. Otherwise, this normalization would have already happened. And to this, we have to be grateful to the women, in fact. It's all women representatives, regardless wherever inside Afghanistan or outside, they really made a difference. Secondly, it comes to the UNAMA. In this situation that you can see that there is a division between the members of the Security Council and also among the donor countries and regional countries, and also regional organizations, OIC, particularly Organization of Islamic Countries and neighboring countries. Right now, somehow, most of these countries are trying to continue their normalization based on their interests and based on their priorities and what they deem is good for them. It's not because of the people of Afghanistan. And unfortunately, nobody cares about the human rights and women's rights in the region or in Afghanistan. What is the only thing we hear some kind of support about inclusivity and also about the women's participation. But when it comes to practical steps, it's not defined what kind of inclusivity and what kind of women's participation, because it needs really a strong support when it comes to, for example, implementation of UNAMA's mandate. When it comes to engaging with the Taliban, you should bring, in fact, in the Doha, we saw that when you are calling on the Taliban and you're bringing the Taliban, you're trying to promote them and normalize and give them the platforms, it is definitely, we need a woman to be also there. So, but unfortunately on women, even the UN was trying to somehow make compromises. And we saw that the women representatives were completely sidelined, and only there was a very separate session with them. And it's unfortunate. And I was the one who really officially criticized this at the Security Council. Otherwise, somehow it was showing that the Doha process has 2-3 days. One is with the official meeting, and then women is also there. But nobody knew what type of format. So if we want women participation, we have to bring women in a meaningful. They should be involved in the whole process, from in the negotiations, on the table, and after that. It doesn't mean only to have a separate session with the women and just hear them, but they are not on the table. The Taliban, women should be a nightmare for the Taliban. Wherever they go, they should be faced with women, because the women of Afghanistan are today paying a high price, and they are the ones who are the victims of their policies. And with this situation, we see that UNAMA's role is very important. But UNAMA's role somehow, when we are calling or acting how to hold like UNAMA accountable and how to ask for effective implementation of UNAMA's mandate, it's very important to continue our voices, to raise our voices, to engage with all stakeholders at different levels, and just ask. I fully agree that there are really universal values, and they have to stick to these universal values. If there is, for example, a political crisis about Afghanistan, it doesn't mean that UN also should make compromises on their values, because the situation will change. After 3 years, we don't see any progress from the Taliban side. So we really need a change of international approach, that international community must support the voices or the opposition groups. I mean, opposition group, it means diverse, all democratic voices of women, civil society representative, human rights advocates, and diaspora. And for Afghans, my message is that it doesn't matter, regardless of wherever you are, you have to continue to contribute in these discussions. We, of course, the Taliban's policies will really lead to a change of policy at the international level, at the regional level. But we really need, I agree with Ms. Ursula, that new young faces and those credible faces should form a kind of credible platform to face this current situation on the Taliban. Yeah. So I hope I covered, but
thank you. Yeah, you covered most of the point. We have also recorded the discussion, so we hope that you're going to come with more detailed report. A couple of points that, as I'm wrapping up the program, I would like to mention based on the discussion that we have today. That generally, overall, everybody acknowledges that Afghanistan is in a highly complicated situation. And UNAMA is operating in a quite challenging situation. In the meantime, while there are a lot of criticisms on the approach of UNAMA and the way that UNAMA has managed the situation the last 3 years, still among all Afghan, there is trust in the UN system. Still, they expect improvement rather than rejecting the whole institution. People are asking for principal engagement of UNAMA with the Taliban as a de facto authority, and they're asking for an engagement that will not embolden Taliban, but will actually put pressure on it. They are also asking for engagement with other groups inside Afghanistan as well as outside Afghanistan to make sure that the process is inclusive and Taliban is one of the parties to be engaged with, not the only side to engage with. There's also demand from the international community for supporting and organizing the other side of the table for proper negotiation discussion when the time comes. And the unity of the purpose, while it was highly recommended by Annie, but it was also mentioned by Dr. Ashraf and other discussion, the colleagues, that at least on the women's side and the civil society, there is that unity of purpose. There might be different platforms, but the purpose and the the demands are the same. There is also acknowledgement about participation of Afghans and participants in this discussion from the side of Afghanistan, which is very inspiring and as well as encouraging. We have to keep supporting a diverse civil society within Afghanistan as well as outside, and make sure that we are not creating for unity and easiness of our own engagement with the civil society. We create a hierarchy that itself will create a bottleneck rather than like an open platform for support. And of course, there is huge opportunity for the young generation that they step forward, and the vacuum that we have right now in terms of leadership, they take more responsibility and they demonstrate that capacity that they have a role to play, and they do have that capacity and that capability that they can step in and they can take, at least if not all responsibility, they can begin to take some of the responsibility which is required to be done as anyways in terms of transition of generational transition. The last point that I would like was mentioned about engagement, work inside Afghanistan and as well as outside Afghanistan, organizing ourselves and continuing advocacy. There are several platforms, several initiatives taken by different organizations and associations. And Faragir, which means inclusive, is also one of those initiatives. Since 1 year we are working, and we are working on providing platform for women human rights activists, and focusing on strengthening and claiming the agency of women, and as well as advocating for political participation of women. We are working with women inside Afghanistan, some of them who have participated in discussion today, as well as we are working with women in diaspora. We are engaging with UN Security Council, we are engaging with UN Human Rights Council, we are also engaging with capital of different countries, trying to provide them with evidence-based information for influencing their policy, informing their policy towards Afghanistan. Moving forward after this webinar, I have to mention that on Saturday, 2 days back, we had a Twitter space about the same subject where we tried to mobilize and raise awareness of Afghan community because that was in our local languages. We also had the webinar today, which I think was quite engaging and rich discussion. I thank all the speakers and as well as the participants. We are also consulting in the meantime right now with 200 women and men inside Afghanistan about the mandate of UNAMA, how they see UNAMA, how much they are aware of UNAMA, its mandate, everything. And we are going to compile all this information and put all of them in a one policy recommendation, which we hope that not only us and through Faragir, but also all other colleagues would use that for their advocacy with the UN and as well as the state members, because role of the state members, as mentioned by the speaker, is very much important. And when it comes to demanding for accountability, we should not only focus on the Taliban, we should also focus on the UN that's engaging with the Taliban, and as well as the state members within the region and beyond, that they're also engaging in bilaterally with the Taliban, that we ask for accountability for all of them. In terms of the last point that I want to make about the engagement and of the youth in all these discussions, we do have platforms inside Afghanistan. We have platforms outside Afghanistan. There is one specific branch of Faragir which is focusing on engagement of the youth, mainly boys, because we already have young women in our women advocacy committee. Anybody who is interested in that discussion, please feel free to send us the email to the Faragir, that the email address that you have. And anybody who's interested from inside Afghanistan and outside, we do have the platform, and I'll be more than happy to engage them and work together with them. At the last, I want to thank once again all the speakers for giving the time and speaking today, all the participants who attended today's discussion, and my colleagues, all the technical, for putting all the technicalities and logistics of this webinar together, and as well as our dear translators that they are providing simultaneous translation for this discussion. We thank you all very much, and we wish you a good day. And do stay tuned for the policy paper, which we hope to produce by beginning of 2025, and share with all of you and with other groups and platforms. Thank you all very much.
For anybody who joined midway or would want to have access to the recording, because this webinar was recorded, feel free to write to us, and the email ID has been shared by me on chat, and we will revert back to you with the recording in a couple of days. Thank you everybody for joining once again.
Thank you.